Okay, so there's psychedelics are so interesting. They're so bizarre in so many ways, and can kind of elicit so many different kinds of experiences. They're used in so many different kinds of ways, and I'm fascinated by the literature that is slowly maturing, um, and uh, that's just investigating the mechanisms, or like what the hell's going on when we take a psychedelic, and how it could be helpful in reducing depression or helping someone get over PTSD or something like that. So I'd
Hmm.
love to hear your best guess right now on mechanisms. And I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about psychological flexibility and neuroplasticity, which,
Yep.
as far as I could tell, is sort of like the dominant model right now.
Yeah.
Can you just sort of explain that, what that model is, and how do you think that um, it can lead to greater well-being?
Thanks. Yeah, I find this whole topic
Hmm.
fascinating as well. And I feel really grateful for the work that's being done in the field of trying to understand what's going on. And I think a lot of theories that have some weight to them are coming through functional magnetic resonance imaging research, a lot that's been spearheaded by Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, and that is, expanding. We're seeing more and more um, higher institutions opening up departments of psychedelic investigation and using tools like fMRI to see what's happening in the brain. And for the listeners that don't know what that is, it functional magnetic resonance imaging is like having an MRI, but instead of a static picture, which is in one point in time, you're actually watching the brain on that level over time. And you're able to see what parts of the brain are connecting, what parts of the brain are disconnecting. And we can also compare, under a state like psychedelics versus healthy, normal's ordinary state of consciousness, what the sort of mathematically computated trends in difference in state are happening in all these different networks. So it's like a network understanding of our brain. And so I think that's lending a lot. And what it's showing is when we're um, under the effect of a classical psychedelic, or even there's now been some, which is like psilocybin, LSD, DMT. There's also been some investigation now into entactogen like MDMA, which is not a classical psychedelic, but there's similarities. I think a lot of it is coming from the classical psychedelic research. There are a multiplicity of new possible connections that happen. We're seeing increased connections across the hemispheres of the brain and increased connections within the hemispheres of the brain. And the listeners, and you've probably seen, this little diagram representation. There's two circles beside each other, and one sort of depicts our usual ordinary state of consciousness, where the connections happening in our brain are the ones that have been highly conditioned over our lifetime, right? It's our learned way of thinking, paying attention, of how our actual brain is operating, the connections that we're making, which informs how we perceive our biases, everything. And then the circle beside that is much more colorful with way more lines, all across, which is representing this state with a psychedelic, a classical psychedelic on board. And so one of the, Dr. Carhart Harris, who I referenced, he talks about the rebus model, which is relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, and also the entropic brain model, and even primary states of consciousness model. And, to summarize, it's like that first circle with our well rehearsed patterns is there's a lot of weight in our daily lives to that. It's very hard. Learning is uncomfortable because to learn, we have to make new neural connections. So you try learning like an instrument or something. It's like, you feel uncomfortable and it's getting over that hump of learning something new, it's hard to start making those trailheads to wire new pathways in our brain. Whereas when the psychedelic is on board, all of a sudden those new pathways become quite easily accessed in the moment. And those heavily weighted priors all of a sudden don't have so much weight anymore. And where in the past, those heavily weighted ways of thinking and perceiving would have, like a new idea might have just bounced right off of it because they're so strong. It's like that new idea can come in and send ripples and so it's really creating this opportunity to perceive differently, and likely this is what is explaining how new insight, like aha kind of insights, can emerge in the acute effects of psychedelics, because all of a sudden these ways that our brain is connected are kind of broken down, and then there's a new repertoire of connections that are accessible. And so that can be very powerful, right? And we also know that psychedelics enhance things that promote neuroplasticity, not only by these sort of functional connective ways, but also, we see evidence of synaptic sprouting. So like there's the neuron, and the synapse is where sort of the dendrite and the axon meet. It's where like our nerves connect, and it's like a tree. It's like arborized. And in depression, for example, the dendrite is actually a little bit like withered, kind of like not as robust of a tree as compared to somebody who doesn't have depression. And then within 24 hours after ketamine, also a psychedelic, not a classical one, you actually look on an electron microscope at that arborization, and it plumps up. It looks almost like normal. So there's this very rapid effect of something going on that's helping with the ability of our nerves to connect, our nerve cells to connect with each other, to grow new connections. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is increased, BDNF, with psychedelics. It's also increased with exercise, with fasting, and with other things. So that too can promote new learning. So I think there's multiple mechanisms. Yeah.
I'm really curious, is those two, I don't know, models or whatever that you just described, is that the same phenomenon playing out at two different levels, or are those two completely different mechanisms?
Well, I think that it's a different lens. Like one is, I think they're both happening
Yeah.
simultaneously,
Yeah.
but the changes in the functional connectivity of the brain on sort of like that higher level in real time, um, it's that's a very acute effect. Yes, BDNF is happening too. So at the
Mm-hmm.
same time that we know there's these new repertoires of connection available, we also
Mm-hmm.
know that chemically there's stuff happening
Right.
that actually can reinforce those new connections, or
Yeah.
help that. And that's where we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but that's
Mm-hmm.
where the very crucial importance of integration comes in.
Yes.
Because, if you pick up an instrument once and play it a few times, you might get a little better, but then if you put it down and then don't return to it, those new pathways they're gone, right? It's what fires together, wires together is essentially neuroplasticity. You got to keep going down that trail again and again. So where the acute effects of psychedelics can create this profound possibility, it doesn't mean it's going to last, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
um, that's where it behooves us to support individuals to actually meaningfully engage, committed actions, and in line with the maybe new values that they've clarified through the new insights that they've had. That's all kind of some of the mechanisms. There's other elements too, but I'll just pause there.
Hey, thanks for checking out that clip of the Mindspace podcast. You can get the full episode here on YouTube or check it out on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks, and be well.